identity is now becoming weaponized and is now being used for profit. Having a platform that just broadcasts information is great, but if it lacks the teeth to have impact, then that means we're doing more damage than good. The next 10 years is going to be massively transformational.
Rajan Singh Nazran, the founder of the global Indian network. How AI is reshaping society, of course, journalism, diplomacy, and as well the diaspora.
If AI and algorithms have the ability to give you the information that only you want to see, that keeps you in that bubble of activity, but what we lose out on then is open conversations that can actually change the way in which we view the world. How do we actually get communities together to say, why don't we tackle things such as child trafficking, indigenous laws? That's where we should be going as a community. But instead, we're going the opposite direction.
Hello, everyone. My team and I have been crafting content and stories that inform, inspire, empower, and bring real value to you. If you haven't already, please take a moment to check that you're subscribed. It's the easiest way to support our work and stay updated with every new release. Join us on this journey of learning and discovery. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for our latest drops.
Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast show. Once again, profiling high performance and global personalities changing the world and looking at the dialectics between business, technology, and culture and creative industries, and how we look at all of this and combine it together. One of the things that we've been very excited is how we've been profiling global personalities that are very diverse. And I have this expression that every human is humanity, but there's a lot of humanity in all of us that take us to different directions. This show is once again powered and created in partnership with the publications and organizations citiesabc.com, businessabc.net, and wisdomi.ai, and part of all this ecosystem of people listening to us around the world that are welcome to our series. So today I'm quite excited to bring someone that I would say you cannot put in a box, and that brings a lot of different multitude and polymath capacities. So I welcome to the series Rajan Singh Nazran, that is a British Indian explorer, journalist, poet, and global entrepreneur. With more than 15 years of experience, he has traveled around the world, across 75 countries. And one of the things that is wonderful about his work is the way he documents the frontline realities, and as well been interacting with some of the most influential figures shaping the world today. Rajan has been taking from places like Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis, through hostage situations and in very unstable regions, risking his life, and as well going through places like the path of Category 5 hurricanes and into conversations with vice president, tribal chiefs, and business leaders from the rainforest to the boardroom. One of the things we're going to be talking, of course, is that he is the founder of the global Indian network. There's a multi-platform ecosystem that highlights the global Indian diaspora and strengthens international dialogue through the different bridges between governments and institutions and across 49 countries. Through the Global Indian Network, GIN, he as well created his own award-winning podcast with destination pages and editorial series. And this platform is amazing for all the different capacities of content and richness and wealth of experiences. And this platform has been actually putting together a lot of things. And that's one of the things we try to do in this podcast, is joining people and ecosystems. So the list goes on. Just some highlights. Rajan has been as well involved in a lot of things, especially how we look at governments and institutions and how trade corridors and different networks work worldwide. And it's one of the things that I'm quite excited to discuss today. So Rajan, the list is gone, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
No, the pleasure's mine, Dinis. And I suppose on my side, it's It is a surreal experience to be on the other side of the microphone this time. But I know that I'm in wonderful hands. And congratulations for you and your team for the exact ecosystem that you developed by helping to also change the way in which we look at each other and recaptivate human stories of purpose. I'm excited.
Fantastic. So I want to start by the basics. So from an adventure and as well a wealth of knowledge that is quite unique. So where did all this started? So because you're not someone that you can put in a box because there's so much diversity of experience, passions, and as well professional business and technology.
Oh, I want to take you back to a scene from my youth that kind of captivates it. I was born in Handsworth, Birmingham, so far from the bourgeoisie of any type of area. And for those that know the UK, in particular Birmingham, they'll know exactly the challenges there. When I was younger, in my living room, I grew up with both Jim Reeves being played on the radio and the Jabji Sahib at one. My mother was born in the Philippine Islands, father was born in Punjab, India. So as you can say, I was almost a global Indian before I became the global Indian because we had this cross-section of cultures. And growing up, there used to be this marble atlas in the room, and I used to spin it as any kid does. And wherever I used to put my finger, I said, well, that would be my home. Little did I know that that would be a prophecy for where the future was. So I think it was almost growing up, I always had a desire to see the world. And growing up, like many South Asians, you see the good, the bad, and the damn right ugly in regards to how culture is, how identity is, and how it misfires in the way that we other individuals. But more importantly, how it almost captivates you to say, well, this is what life is. And so growing up, I wanted to change it. I thought, I can't be ignorant. I have to see the world as it is. There must be a reason why things work a certain way. And I think the beginning portal was there. It was just a necessity to either leave Birmingham, but more importantly, to almost discover what it means to be a human being in the world at large, you know?
So let me ask you a couple of things. So from the diversity of your early years, and like you said, from your mother to your father, which is very different worlds, how this look at your, and as well, of course, British Indian, I know that the last decades have been quite different. The UK is becoming very Indianized, let's put it that way, but it's very different perceptions. And you mentioned Punjabi, which is very strong as well in terms of cultural identity. So I want to touch that because I think a lot of people listening to us, they are in their own culture, their own, I call it the operating system of their own cultures, but you have a kind of a multidisciplinarity of the operating system, let's put it that way.
Absolutely. Look, I think what it is, one thing I've realized with travel, the first part is we see the world as we are, not as it is. You know, I grew up ignorant. I mean, that's the reality of it. Ignorant to the degree that my parents knew what they knew based upon the exposure and experiences that they had. My operating system was able to enhance itself the moment I was able to start traveling, whether it was university, going to Canterbury to doing a very specialized course, to then going to Italy in Torino and studying the things that I did. But the more exposure I had with the world at large, the more it widened my operating system. And I started to realize that identity wasn't this fixed route that most people, especially the South Asians, think it is. We think of identity as being a cage. It's a prison with fixed bars and a fixed ceiling and a fixed floor. And that, Dinis, affects everything. It impacts the way in which we live our lives, the food that we eat, through to the people that we marry, through to the way in which we look at other people. And it impacts the entire human experience that one has. But that identity should not be static. It is constantly moving. It's constantly evolving. And with travel, it enabled me to see that. Also, yep, it helps when you go through near-death experiences, because it certainly puts life back into its spheres to say, well, this is a fragility of what it is to be human. But my operating system, and I like that idea, was upgraded purely because you realize there's so much more in the world. And as South Asians, I think sometimes we use culture as either a shield on one side or a weapon on another. But if something like culture is never looked into, if we never really digress and take a deep plunge into it, then ultimately our lives will be controlled by a hidden hand that we've always had the key towards. I think is really important now more than ever, especially when we have the advent of AI, where we see the weaponization of identity across the globe, that we ask more reflective questions within ourselves to really experience what freedom is supposed to be. God, this feels like a very deep philosophical hour, doesn't it? But hopefully it puts into perspective a bit about why I do what I do, but the essence behind it as well.
So you touch one of the things that that you have is that you had from being a mental coach for the Indian Olympic team, and you have quite a lot of spiritual and academic background, and as well as a poet. So I want to touch this as well. How do you pick this and this experience in particular to build right now the work you have working with elite performers and as well with political leaders, entrepreneurs, and the diaspora communities worldwide?
So it's a question of how did I pick up on that? What was the golden thread that launched it all? That's a really interesting question. Look, I grew up in a household, probably like a lot of your listeners out there and viewers, where culture, tradition, and religion was almost entwined like a deadly cocktail. And so I saw things like domestic violence growing up, not indirectly with my own parents, but in the outer circle. I think that makes you far more reflective and able to be perceptive where you read the room before realizing you need to read the room for a variety of different reasons. And so I think that perceptiveness allowed me to almost pick up on these subtleties. I was also very fortunate. Mum was born in the Philippines. So if you were ill in my household, the cure to illness was having a Virgin Mary candle burning on your stomach type thing, right? And so having that type of mother proved to be very useful because she was involved in things like Reiki. She loved things like regression therapy. So inadvertently, when you have a mother that almost asks you as a 7-year-old, what are your thoughts about this text? Not regurgitating it, but saying, what do you pick up? It almost retrains your brain to understand more. I was very fortunate that at that time, Mum then decided to take me involved in a group in the UK, which was called the Psychic Research Foundation, which was headed up by a guy called John Starkey. And so almost not like modern day Stranger Things, that's on TV, but they brought me in here and I got to learn things about clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience, about healing and all those almost metaphysical principles from a younger age. And then also joined the Shaolin Temple. I'm not a bit to my current haircut. This is just out of coincidence. But I joined that and that taught me a bit more about how healing and the subtleties work. So I think I grew up with this almost as a consequence of seeing things when I was younger. It helped me make sense of the inner world before I could make sense of the outer world. And so whether it's out of luck, fate, or just out of pure fortitude from there, it was something that was allowed to develop. And I was also very fortunate that my parents were quite liberal. For the day and age in the 80s in which I was born in, to be able to allow me to be a bit more experimental in my ideas around the world, it made a big difference, And if you have a look at the work that I do now, that golden thread still continues. A lot of the questions that I sought after in remote areas, whether it is Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis, or if it is speaking with a billionaire, is asking questions that are more profoundly human, more than just having a look at the business elements, because I think that's the only thing that we have. Is this idea of humanness. We're not going to take anything with us on our next voyage. And surely the only thing that we brought with us into this voyage was a capacity of feelings or maybe experiences or memories that will guide us through. And so learning that from a younger age kind of helps. It puts into perspective about what's real, what's needed, what is true, and everything else that's on the peripheries are just nice things to have, but doesn't really equate to our human journey on this planet.
That's very special. So one of the things that is fascinating as well is that you've been traveling for 7 to 70 countries, and you met a lot of different people. You have, like I mentioned before, some kind of even near-death experiences in some very risky environments. So tell us about that. As an adventurer myself, and I love to travel, a bit of that, but as well how that affect the way you look at business, the way you look at your own lifestyle, and as well as both a writer, journalist, explorer, and a business person?
Oh, I think my caveat is if any of your audience ever needs somebody to book their honeymoon destinations, do not ask me. I'm probably by far the worst person for that. Um, Look, I think every experience has been wonderful, right? The fact that, put it this way, you hear about this statement, the calm before the storm. Everyone's heard about it, right? You only know what that means when you are looking at the eye of the storm. I remember being in St. Kitts and, getting one Cat 5 hurricane is crazy. Having three consecutive Cat 5 hurricanes, it's almost an experience of a lifetime. And so those things teach you almost that identity is certainly man-made, because when you're looking at the sea of grey that's heading towards you, when there's no animals that you can see or hear, where the world goes implicitly silent for that moment, and when you realize you can't run away from this, you only have to embrace it. Man alive, it makes you human, because all of a sudden you fall every single thing. And so that almost helps me rewire to say, well, life is quite fragile. I remember I was in Sierra Leone during the Ebola crisis, and you meet people there, and there's two things that stood out for me. One of the great scenes was there's a guy that saved my life in Sierra Leone, Amado, and he told me about the Civil War. And the brutality of the Civil War in Sierra Leone teaches us something about forgiveness, and the same thing in Cambodia, where you had a guy, his hand was chopped off, and he had to share a taxi with the guy who actually did it many years later. But rather than get fueled up by anger, rather than get fueled up by hate, this guy did something that most societies need to learn from, which was forgiveness. Not forgetting what took place, but deep forgiveness when your life isn't aligned for it. So you hear these stories, and it almost re-establishes what it means to be human to you. You can't help it because the stories haunt you, right? And Amado, he told me stories about what was happening during the Ebola crisis, and I met with a lot of the people that were victims. I also saw a lot of the fraud and the corruption that took place. I got to interview everyone from the president at the time, Ernest Bai Koroma, through to the ministers and the big business owners, and you realize that there's so much more that met the eye. And you almost learn that what we're often told in the media isn't necessarily the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, but they're a collective of narratives that almost reshape the way in which, as publics, we view different countries to be. And so that taught me again, saying, actually, we deserve better as humans. The more we can understand about each other, the more we can understand about the nations our communities call home, the more we can dissect these ideas of stereotypes, again, all coming back to the human story, well, the better society is going to be, right? And so every experience that I've had, every exposure along those ways from 75 countries plus, it challenges you, it changes you, until when I go back home into the wonderful streets of Birmingham that has more canals than Venice, but less common sense than any type of thing sensical, you start realizing that this hidden hand of identity is what's really affected people for many years, if not generations to come. It's those experiences that help shape me, and which in turn help shape the Global Indian Network to say, come on, we have to look at the world differently. We need to open ourselves up to open conversations, even if they're taboo, but we need to have these conversations now more than ever, because we know AI is coming around, it's grown massively. There's a lot of fake news out there, but more importantly, the very rupture in what makes us human, identity, is now becoming weaponized and is now being used for profit. So therefore, division is sold as profit. So unless we talk about these experiences, unless we remap the world as experiences, God knows where we're going to be the next 10 years.
So before you go deep dive on this big thing, so I want you touch what you created. So let's go to the Global Indian Network, GIN. So this is a platform touching more than 100 million people. And so first of all, what is the Global Indian Network? And we'll put all the links to all the websites for people listening to us. How does it work? And as well, how you created it and how we're taking this forward.
Yeah, good. So put it this way. Do you know how you have Indian people all over the world? You know, there's two things certain. Any country that you go, you'll see potatoes and you'll see people that look like me. And so as a community, we're right the way across the globe in more numbers than most people realize. And it's because of a few things. One, it was indentureship. It spread people right the way across the globe because of the Brits. The second thing, it's also because of trading relationships, you know, from whether it's Oman through to the Middle East, through to even now places such as Uruguay. The community has grown, it is spread. But amongst this massive community that has done really well in business as well as in politics, there's a problem. And the problem is we don't know much about each other. As communities, the guys in Malawi have got no idea about the guys in Malaysia, and likewise from Suriname to Singapore. So for the last nearly 20 odd years, I've traveled around the world bringing these stories to life to say, well, why don't we rediscover more about each other, look at the ideas that surround identity, but almost start fixing and tweaking this so we can look at better relationships, how to do better business in certain countries, how governments can attract meaningful FDI, but more importantly, how do we reimagine the world at one? So that was the roots of the Global India Network. How I started stitching this together was I used to do work with the Daily Telegraph, then I did work with the Indian Express where we did the big reports in there looking at these nations. Then all of a sudden, like the world knows, COVID came in and everything stopped. All travel was halted. So a really good friend of mine, Kovinder Gir, he was part of Goodness Gracious Me in the BBC, said, Rajan, you got all these stories from around the world every time you come back. Why do we set up a podcast? Why do you do a podcast? Interview these guys. So not knowing anything about how to use a microphone and certainly not being the poster child for a Microsoft employee that is Indian origin, i.e. being tech savvy, I thought, why not? So I approached all my friends that I met along the travel saying, setting up a podcast, and the whole aim and purpose of this is enable people to know about each other, but secondly, for people to understand what identity means in different countries, because I kept seeing it during COVID. News was spiking up, a lot of defamatory news, and people were almost othering constantly. And so that was almost the starting point of the incarnation of the digital revolution, where we started doing that. Then I joined forces with the likes of some of the bigger platforms, like the Indian Express again, like the CNN guys, like CNBCs in India. And that's where through our partnerships, we're able to reach mass audiences where we'll work with great brands, great countries, produce content around them that have that humanist stories behind it and push it out to global audiences. Then I got fed up. I thought, well, this is great. It's fantastic. But how does it make any meaningful change? Now we're just broadcasting information. How do we actually get communities together to say, why don't we tackle things such as child trafficking? Or why do we get communities together to say, well, how do we tackle areas such as indigenous laws that were being passed by different governments around the world? And that's where the second part came in, where we started setting up the ambassadors program to bring in these really well-known names to say, hey, look, stand by my side, take up a cause, and let's work towards it. Because having a platform that just broadcasts information is great and wonderful. But if it lacks the teeth to have impact, then that means we're doing more damage than good. We're not making any difference. And that's where the second part came in, saying, well, how do we actually socially help things grow for the better? And then how do we work with brands then and companies say, hey, look, join us with this pursuit of changing the world one conversation at a time for the good. And that's kind of where I kicked off that second part of the journey. And that's taken me even more traveling, going around the world, being able to have heads of states on the platform, both videoing interactions in country by doing TV work, but also bringing them on our podcast. And where we are now is that we're the silent platform that whispers in the ears of some of the world's most influential people who know me personally, but also appreciate the ethos of the work that I do. And we get a lot of ultra high net worth individuals, as well as government officials as well.
Well, that's a quite impressive story, and congratulations for what you achieved, and as well how you put this together between your personal research and very similar to what I do as well here on this series, and how complex this is and how important it is as well. So I want to touch a couple of things that you mentioned, Rajan. So one is at the moment as an organization that is targeting India, and India is becoming, well, at the moment is the fifth economy in terms of GDP, but in terms of population is number one in the world. There's as well a lot of Indias because it's a continent in a lot of ways. You are as well part of that with all the variety of your diversity. But for people listening to us, there's still a lot of myths around India. For instance, I had the case of working with big institutions in the US where they had the most, I would say even very bad impressions and very bad common senses. So tell us about this, because of course there's an India that is becoming the most sophisticated, where most of the CEOs of global companies are actually from India, and then there's a lot of different velocities, and then there's the way India is impacting the world from its legacy, its culture, its religions, its kind of spirituality. So I want to touch that before we deep dive in.
So look, there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of stereotypes out there, right? Growing up, everyone heard of Indiana Jones, and they thought that most of us ate monkey brains and eyeballs, right? And you'll be surprised, Dinis, there's countries that I go to where there's still a lot of myths around that. Look, the reality is there's a lot of news cycles out there that like to almost demonize people that look like us. And that's an unfortunate thing. And we're seeing that even more so as times go on. There's also another incarnation coming in. And the reality is common sense is everything but common. You know, people don't take the time to research. They rather stick onto stereotypes than rather realizing the reality. But unfortunately, those conversations of absurdities that we're seeing right now amongst people that look like me, not only in India, but around the world, is leading to current day atrocities. We're seeing in the UK, you know, the fact that you have this olive-like skin color means that you no longer belong here. We saw the incarnation of that in places like Uganda with the likes of Idi Amin, who did it out of politics rather than any form of ignorance. It was more of a political movement. The problem is it's not just about those nations, it's also us as a community. We're widespread. We're larger as a diaspora amongst the world than most other communities out there. By golly, since we've been speaking the last 10 minutes, we've probably seen a birth rate of X thousands of new global Indians being born. That's how large we are. But what have we done collectively to change the narrative for good? Apart from being poster childs for saying, great, here's a CEO of Indian origin. Here's a guy that is running a FTSE 500 company. Great, wonderful, clap our hands. What have we done to help make civilization on this planet better for all of us, regardless of if you're part of the 50 Shades of Brown or not? So there's a big issue also, I believe, within our own community where we need to stand up, where we have to talk about the ills in society and start working together to change that, not being self-congratulatory for the fact that we just happen to be born brown and we just happen to be, if you believe in reincarnation, being born of Indian origin or South Asian extraction. So I think the conversations that we need to be having as a community have to go greater and deeper. And I think where this comes into is that haven't we just commercialized everything? And that's a big issue of it. You know, all of a sudden being brown means that you can attach towards a brown pound. And that means we need to be heightened and more aggressive towards our identity, rather than just realizing that my skin color, my name, and even my idea of faith is just an arbitrary factor to my humanness, not the defined principle. And I dare say it sounds slightly hypocritical, but that in itself is an Eastern philosophy. That is a true Indianness that we should be carrying. I think that's what the problems are. It's not just about how the world looks at us, it's the fact that how we look at each other. And more importantly, how do we stand the test of investigation globally to say we can be a source of good as a community, that we can come together and challenge some of the biggest issues that are taking place globally, that we can unite and say, great, do you know what? Not in our name. If we're seeing climate issues that we've seen, how do we start facing that together, bringing together the people of our community in Silicon Valley through to the financial markets now in places like Guyana, and saying, how do we work together to solve these problems? Not exclusionary, to say it's only about browns, but revolutionizing the thought patterns. That's where we should be going as a community. But instead, I feel like we're going the opposite direction. You know, we're propping on the back of skin color. that can't be the way forward, you know?
So I want to be, so let's touch this. So there's a lot of challenge in the world economy. And of course, like you just touched, and you touched before as well, there's all the layers of, which is, if you look at history, I always like to look at history. And I'm going a bit probably more philosophical, because in this, I think you are as well a writer and a poet, so you know what I mean. We have a couple of different contradictions. In one end, we have the most advanced civilization in history, and at the same time, we have better rates of development than ever in terms of statistics comparatively, because we live more, we have a bigger life expectancy. Even the most poor person in India has more capacity than ever in history. And as well, India mostly mitigated most of the poverty. A huge part of the poverty of India has been taken, thankfully, and there's still a percentage, but comparative to the size of the country is much smaller. And this goes the same worldwide. But at the same time, there's a sense of dialectics and I would say disparities that is bigger than ever in history, mostly because the wealthiest people on the planet have capacities that were never, almost like superhuman capacity, let's put it that way. And especially we are right now getting to the age of AI. So bear in mind that you touch with a lot of leaders, that you've been having all the different nuances of both traveling, seeing different cultures, different countries, different even ways of looking at discipline, leadership. And as well, if you look at statistics, there's very few countries that are democratic in the world. Well, if you put India, it makes it quite big, because India is a huge part of the world population. But in terms of percentage of countries that are democratic, it's much smaller, the countries that are democratic versus the ones that are not. And of course, there was, I'm making a big question, but I wanted this to be an open one, is if you look at, there was a quote recently from Harari, that from the writer of Homo sapiens, that he mentioned a very interesting thing, that is, if we're building right now super intelligence, and this super intelligence is a continuation of us humans. So from coming back to your trajectory of dealing with a lot of humans around the world and a lot of different countries, how do you see these challenges? And as well, especially, at least for my perception, there's a big risk of lack of understanding of what it is digital transformation, what it is AI transformation, and how this is going to impact everything as we put this in a bigger scale. And you are as well creating content. So as a publisher, as a writer, this content goes to AIs that process this, and these business models are becoming all disrupted. So that's the things that I want to stop here, just to hear a bit of your background and how do you see these things. And you touched a bit of it, but I want to look at the positive
Take
and
a deeper
negative.
dive. Everything that I do is deeply based upon my own wacky mind, right? So I look at it that I'm on this planet. I'm not born in a country, I'm born on the planet, and therefore I want to experience it to the most. And that's part of my own lived experience. And that means my business has to marry who I am rather than me marrying the business. So that way, at least I can have a continuation of making the world better in my own mindset, but also exploring the world in a better way to understand more about who I am and what it means to be here. The way that AI is impacting, especially companies like mine, is the fact now there's a slight change in the nuance. When I do our podcast, we will have a head of state, and it is a fly in the wall situation where, as an audience, you get to listen to some of the world's greatest minds out there in those countries in most cases, speaking about the issues that matter most. That is one-on-one. That means there's no interruption. Here's a person, here's me, there's the audience. It's a nice three-way pillar. Where content's now leading to, and it's been doing it for a while, is that you got this rise of the influencers, which is saying, here's a three-way pillar or two-way pillar, me and the individual, and now they're making a respectful comment about this interaction. And these people are monetizing on that. They're not really adding any value to the conversation, but all they're doing is recycling the conversation and making money on the back of that through ad sales. So that's where a business model is heading into. And then you have another aspect, which is AI, where people are saying, well, can you please summarize this? So now it's no longer about this conversation that is true between two human beings having a real discerning conversation that is emotionally felt, that delivers a punch, that informs the audience about key issues that they need to know, that helps increase their understanding of the world, but also maybe understanding about business or processes. But now it's just become an arbitrary thing saying, actually, I want a summary of this because I want to see how I can implement that. So that's where AI is coming into even further. What are the dangers for that is the fact that soon these conversations will almost become just a zoo-like thing, because we'll be speaking so many things about after the fact rather than the fact itself that it'll just become diluted. I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with Museveni in Uganda. He's the president of Uganda. A lot of people know him for the South Asians because of what happened beforehand with Idi Amin. Here's a guy's voice who matters to a lot of people out there because he's one of the longest serving heads of states in Africa. So when you have a conversation with him, you hear his nuances, but you get an understanding of how his world thinks, why he made these decisions. Those are more emotive discussion pieces that then lead to economic policies or changes in laws, or it gives investors the confidence to go in. But if somebody were to take that conversation and distill it within 5 marks for a family office to say, well, does this provide me confidence to invest in or not? Well, that might give you a one-direction result, but it's not going to give you all the analysis that you need to have that this conversation would do that gives you trust in where the nation's heading to. This is a problem where content's now heading to. We don't really care about the source of conversations. We just want the end result of the conversation. And that to me becomes very deadly because it goes back to that whole vicious circle where things start becoming stereotypes again. Do you know what I mean, Dinis, by the way, from this? Because then all of a sudden you're collecting all this information, you're repurposing it to say, okay, well, how does this help me function in X, Y, and Z? How does it help me get to this part? That's a dangerous part. It becomes a dangerous minefield. And then there's another part to this is if AI, which it does do, and algorithms have the ability to give you the information that only you want to see, that keeps you in that bubble of activity, that means content like ours. You can take one of our videos, splice it up to the nth degree, and you can have something that either contain prejudice, that allows you to have prejudice, or it can contain content pieces that enable you to question the world. But that algorithm can take the parts that it does like and feeds into that aggressive loop. And there's a lot of content producers that are doing that. Because now division equals profit, short, sharp content pieces have a lot more chewing gum nature for audiences, and that means you can monetize on that better. But what we lose out on then is open conversations that can actually change the way in which we view the world. It's a bit like a COP meeting. At the beginning, it was there to change the world, and now it's like a big UN party. We get to discuss big opportunities that make money rather than actually making a reasonable difference. That is a caveat of my own philosophy, by the way, not of the Global Indian or your network either. But that's where the dangers are.
Yeah, so I agree completely on the dangers. Let's look at the positive. And I think, of course, in this show, I've been highlighting the opportunities and the challenges. And I just want to read a couple of numbers that I want to repeat. So if you look, mostly you touch about the creator economy. So the creator economy market is estimated to be worth $250 billion, and is projected to double to $500 billion by 2027, so in around 2 years. And as well, there are 4.2 billion social media users out there. But the challenge we have, like you mentioned, is in one end, there's the philosophical and issues around the use of data, the use of even manipulation of data by these AI sophisticated tools that we are building. At the same time is how we create the revenue streams for creators and even for people, because of course, officially, for instance, by 2026, most of the software developing jobs will disappear. So
Absolutely.
That's official, okay?
Yeah.
Whatever people like or not. And even, I think right now, straight away, and this is statistics from this week, in the US, you can replace 15% of the jobs with AI.
Yeah.
And I know this is mind-blowing, but that's the statistics. So now, one thing I want to touch on, I want to be always positive, and I think I only had one two people on this podcast, actually, one of them there is going to be launched soon, that actually were quite positive. And I think 99% of people are like you and me, probably more concerned about this. So, but there's one thing here. Effectively, there will be, especially if you get into AGI or multiple entities of AGI, definitely the disruption will go much bigger. Well, my question for you, as someone that deals with a lot of chiefs of state and leaders, is, so let's ask the first question. How ready are they for this? Let's start with this question.
Okay, I think when we speak about the orange economy, which you are, honestly, I think a lot of heads of state will still think that that is an agricultural term rather than anything to do with new thing. And that's just the reality of it, right? You've got a country that has made X amount of money through oil. Everybody would be giving the lip service, but nobody really understands just the depth of what the beast is of AI, how it can be, one, absolutely a game changer for economies to regrow, to retrain, to allow people to be more involved. Secondly, I think a lot of people think that, you know, AI for them is all about just creating content. I think it goes a lot deeper. It's saying, well, how do we not use it like how certain management companies use it in recent state and got caught out by doing audits and everything else, but how can you actually use AI to produce new economies that will help out? You know, not just the physical premises of data centers, but everything else that comes up as a derivative. So the question is, how prepared are they? I don't think they're prepared enough. And the reason why they're not prepared enough is because I don't think they truly understand the impact of it. And part of that is a generational pull. You've got a lot of heads of states now that are older than ever before. It's a generational issue. And so therefore, they don't really understand the real world principles of it, apart from how to get themselves re-elected back in. And that's the honest, open answer there. The other part of it is, should they know more? How is it going to impact them? Absolutely. If we have a look at just even simple things. Right now, when we talk about space and space technology, most people think it's just about sending up a spaceship to the ethers of the world and somehow we can colonize Mars. But no, it's a bit deeper than that. We now have the ability to send up rockets and satellites that can tell you what's happening in certain fisheries. We can have a look at what climatic changes are taking place and how it's creating erosion of soil, as well as all the security defense parts as well. A lot of governments aren't realizing, at least the frontier markets aren't realizing the impact that that's going to have on their futures. It means, one, they can have stronger crop certainty, which is needed. Even if machines take over the world tomorrow, people still need to eat. So you're going to have a look at what's currently taking place there. Secondly, it allows us to monitor weather systems better than ever before. But I don't think the smaller economies are waking up to what this can do for them. And there's a danger there. I don't know whether they're collectively putting their heads in the sand like giant ostriches, yes, pun intended, or if it's a fact that you only know what you know. And if you don't know, it's off the radar. It could be a total knowledge gap. Because for a lot of people, it's still frontier. You know, they think of AI and they only think of ChatGPT. And in that case, they're using it almost like Google. You know, those are what the issues are. IMF cited a report that came out recently as well, 30% job losses, Dinis, in your professional services. Who's that going to impact? That's going to impact people like us guys in the UK, through to the guys in the US, and certainly those guys sitting in Mauritius, which is a massive backdoor entrance to the global financial systems. If you were to speak to the head of state in Mauritius about what are you doing about this and ask them for concrete answers, I dare say the answers would probably be quite alarming for most. You know, what people don't realize in governments is that the next 10 years is going to be massively transformational. The way in which we do business will change. The way in which media is done is going to change. Political campaigns will change. But the way economies rise and fall will be felt more quicker than ever before, especially now that we have a lot of our financial systems indexed more than ever. These are big existential crises. But most people, because they're only thinking about their next electoral term, they're not really bothered. That's where the problem is. The problem is in the human response to this, not the economic one.
I'm completely with you. So So let's take this less doom and probably
Sorry, man. I've been watching obviously too much of the Terminator movies. On the
yeah.
positive side here, look, I think if governments can understand the potential more, not only can be a game changer in terms of FDI attraction and understanding how content can be commercialized and also then optimized. That's one part. The other part is if governments understood it and had the willingness, not just a lack of know-how, but willingness, we can change the way in which corruption is. Because now all of a sudden we can have things that are centralized. It means that when we have things like procurement portals, now we clamp down on corruption. The money actually goes to the people. It helps out develop a national prosperity plan. That's a brilliant thing that AI can do, right? If governments and businesses understood what this could do, we could have a child in India with a $7 laptop being able to access global intelligence and learning how to rescale or relearn about the issues that matter most. And that means you have loads of VCs that will be backing those type of ideas. So the future on the virtuous circle going up can be absolutely remarkable. It means that we got more space for the human talent pools to go out there. And interestingly, for both our spheres that we're involved in, the creative arts and the creative pursuits, the philosophical challenges of the days, well, that means we'll have more exploration in those type of ideas, a deeper understanding of how to make things and processes work. That will be revolutionary. So there is a positive part. This is a solar panel to some type of rose-tinted glasses, Dinis. The problem is maybe I've just traveled enough out there, met enough people that I kind of worry, well, the human need of not the proximity of validation winning elections, but the human need of altruism, will that marry up with the opportunities that AI is offering? That's the equation part there that I don't know how to run the numbers and balance the books,
So let me come back to the governments and decision makers, because one of the challenge we have, and you touched that very well, and this I think is probably one thing that you are pushing a lot in your platform, is that with the work you've been having with 12 heads of state and 100 plus ministers and those of wide network and families and individuals. So definitely there's a big challenge how we look at, first of all, the education, the way you position as well knowledge and intelligence, because like you said, if people like us are struggling, imagine the rest. But I want to look at this in a way that goes behind the cliches, because the challenge is the cliche creates nihilism, and it creates as well normally skepticism, and people that are nihilistic or skeptical, they don't believe in anything and they become extremists. And this is one of the biggest challenges we've been finding around the world. And another thing as well, I've been telling this in this series for years, and I interview some of the most influential people in AI in the planet. There's another level of knowledge and a level of challenge, is that whether we like it or not, we're going to have a new species. That is, at the end of the day, we have the Homo sapiens. Now we're going to have a species that is, in some ways, they say alien, but it's not alien. It's created with our intelligence, but it has a capacity of scaling. So from this angle, of course, we go to the science fiction layers, but I want to come back to your work with governments and family offices and so forth. So I think one of the things that I've been very conscious is the lack of understanding and the lack of narratives and somehow storytelling. Because, for instance, you mentioned, for instance, challenge with influencers and thought leaders, but these are the only jobs you're going to have in the future. And we have 80 billion people. It's like you had the guru, the spiritual guru. You're going to have digital spiritual gurus, whatever we call it. But how do you see this? I want to come back to the leaders, because the challenge, if the leaders are not taking this serious, and I want to just make the question a bit more complex, but I'd like to provoke. The world economy is around $100+ trillion. The kind of the non-conventional or the black economy is around 12.5, more or less. And the sum of all the biggest companies in the world, the top 7, is the same as the black economy. So we have already a big disparity that was never so big. Of course, in history, you had like kings that had everything. You still have that in a lot of countries. But the challenge is the velocity. The velocity is the biggest challenge we have, because this happens in 6 months. The level of knowledge that happened in 6 months, and this is not me saying, all the major AI players are talking about some instances of AGI, or at least some kind of basic stuff. And we are still in the beginning. But the next 3 years or 5 years, if this species that we are creating takes over or becomes sentient, we have a serious problem, because they can make decisions that we cannot think about it. Even if they need energy, Matrix kind of alike, or Terminator, like you mentioned. So coming back to the leaders, how can we make this be heard? Because effectively it's not heard, or it's not perceived. And as well, the challenge is that this is not integrated in the economy. We're creating all of this for what? To make humans out of business?
Yeah, that's
question,
exactly it. Because you hit the nail on the head, right? Because the thing is, you're turning around to a government, this is what AI can do. And they're hearing, well, I need to create jobs for my voters. And this thing is promising to make things more efficient, but to get rid of jobs. How do you balance that book up? Now, the question is really to say, what's in it for them? What's in it for governments to understand? You need to take this seriously and you need to move it ahead. The problem is, it's like any industry, AI included, you have the good, the bad, and the downright ugly. You have a lot of charlatans that are consultants out there advising these governments on things that even they don't know enough on. And governments are spending a lot of money on this, but the results aren't there. So the first part is, how do we get engagement? So we split it down there. We're very fortunate because our podcast goes to over 22 heads of state, over 350 ministers, and we have a market net pool of our audience of over 63 billion in private capital. That means they receive my content every week on their mobile phones, on their direct numbers. That is a one-on-one conversation in which we bring together the relevant minds to say, help educate these guys, because they don't know enough. And even if you're head of state, you can never have enough right advice. And so that's the first part. How do you set up the conversation? The second part then is saying, how do we then get to enable these governments, not through a sales tactic, that's a bit like the whole COP25 type of scenario thing, but how do you enable these governments to actually understand this is how it's going to revolutionize things, that's going to help you win an election, but more importantly, and this is the philosophical difference, importantly, create real national prosperity. Because I think once we got the conversation going, and then we got the means in which we can say AI can be a revolutionizing thing for this, and it can change the very fate of nations, then we can move in the right direction. Because what we really need is trust, familiarity, and then knowledge. Those are the three things that need to be bridged as a gap. What are the obstacles towards that? Well, I think the biggest obstacles is that everyone equates AI with money. They think, well, if I want to implement these systems, it's going to cost me a lot of money to do as a government, and we cannot afford that. Two, if I implement something that has the ability to create real, absolute, fundamental transparency, and your audience knows exactly where I'm getting at here, and you do as well, Dinis. If you can create absolute transparency, how many governments would want that as well? You know, and that's a generational push. I think where we have to go from here is helping empower the next generation of leaders. That's the only place that we can come into. People that are looking to become heads of states, people that are looking to get into this space, people that are going to be coming around in the next elections, and helping them understand the power that these programs can have for them. Then we have a chance to collectively do something better as a civilization. I think another part of this goes to the next part of this. And I know that we're getting very deep and philosophical, but that's what it means to be human. We have to have depth of thought and not just about the arbitrary answers of how much money you make out of things. The next part of it is saying we need a global reshift in the way that we're looking at each other as nations. Right now, we've got country X pegged against country Y because everyone has a deficit and everyone's trying to compete in this warlike nature to create products and sell products and businesses to make money, and therefore it's warfare, but a different dimension. What AI is going to show us very quickly is that it's going to be pockets of those who have and those who don't have. People who control information and people who will be abused by that information that is controlled. So that means everyone has to enter the race right now. That's where it's going to get really interesting. You've heard about quantum computing, but they've also mentioned the next 10 years that the combined AI consensus will outpower the human exposure of experiences. That's fundamental. That means now this is no longer, and I'm not talking about the movies of the 80s. Now what we're going to enter into is a world that none of us are prepared with because we don't even know enough about each other. We've got none of the foggiest about what it means to be human. But now we're going to be competing with something that is far more intelligent than us, that has the ability to outthink us, outperform us, to outwork us. That is our future competition. How many of us are ready to compete? How many businesses are going to be able to do that? How many organizations out there, charities, are going to be able to control the narrative to get people to deal with human problems? How many governments are going to be able to actually go on the stage in the World Economic Forum and answer the tricky questions that AI can come up with that exposes what the problems are? I think that what we have done is by AI collecting the human consciousness of experiences, we would have unleashed the beast in Pandora's box that could actually become a benevolent idea for who we're heading towards, or it can become our absolute destruction. It depends who pulls the strings, doesn't it? Dinis, you know exactly what I'm speaking about here. It's almost allegories of words between the words.
Yeah,
This
and
this is where we're heading to.
Yeah, and history tells us that that all of that, I think we don't need to invent the wheel. So one of the things, and I'm conscious of time. So your storytelling has appeared in Time and a lot of major global publications. So you are as well an explorer, a poet, a journalist, and a business personality. And you've been talking about identity and migration, and we've been talking about how AI is reshaping society, of course, journalism, diplomacy, and as well the diasporas, because we are right now fighting in all the countries with immigrants, but the AI is going to be another immigrant, let's put it that way, and a much more disrupted. So I want to come back to your work with the global Indian events that you launched in 2019 to foster connections, and where we've been working with heads of state, ministers, and so forth. So that, I'm sure, like you said, that the challenge is how we explain to governments about all of this, but how the governments put a sense of urgency on this. Because at the moment, if you look at the media, we're talking only about immigration and trade corridors fights and still some wars. And ironically, people are not understanding. We are still, on the top of that, we're building a technology that is going to disrupt all of this.
Everything.
So coming back to your experience and being very practical here, let's say I don't know, if a minister is listening to us, and I'm sure some will, and you and me have been working with a lot of ministers, how can we make them understand that they have to act now or their children will be in trouble, and all of our children? So let's say if you look at 5 things from your experience, both with your organization and with your own experience dealing with people, what would be the 5 things that you would talk?
Okay, so to help me downchink this further, a minister of what portfolio?
Any minister, because this touches everything.
Everything. So let's go for a prime minister, so the head of state, right? I think the 5 key things realistically, and I'll speak from practicalities, so there's no BS, it's straight down the line. They need to understand, how is AI going to help support them win an election to get elected back in, because that's all that they care about, realistically. Second thing is, how are they going to be able to achieve the promises made? You know, if you turn around and say, I'm going to reduce corruption down, I am going to create more jobs, I'm going to do this. Well, how is AI going to be your best friend and your guardian angel towards making that happen? Third part, really important, is who do you trust to hear that conversation from? Because that's what it comes down to. You need to have a confidence. Now, we're really lucky at the Global Indian Network because These guys have known me for years. They've seen me, whether they're opposition or current heads of states, because they've seen my travels around the world and we kept the relationship going. So that's where we stick in. The fourth part is for voters to understand what promises are, what promises can be achieved, and how AI can be implemented to make this happen, because that now creates accountability, which is super, super important. And the fifth part is how this connects in the global value chain around the world. Now, the fact is, right now, we're dealing with resources, right? So we say, if I were to buy timber from here for this price, I can send it there, and this is what the commodity value is. Or if it's gold or diamonds or anything else, or even rutile. Where we're now entering into, because of the digital age, is no longer just about the commodity, but its use towards technology. That's the biggest power right now, right? Because we got more data centers coming across the globe. I saw them in Uruguay, through to some other markets. We look at the legislations around data centers as well, because protective, especially, there's a lot of sensitive information. And then we look at the security risks, things like terrorism. There's more abundant than ever before, and not in the ways that we think of. And so it's enabling these guys to come together in a forum, in person, to talk about these problems in a way that is trusted and adds familiarity. And then for the right VCs, the right backers, to support the mechanisms by making a cheaper and softer entry point to be implemented within these governments. Right now, what we're seeing is unfortunately what we saw with climate change. I did a talk for the Commonwealth many years ago, and you had all the heads of states and all the ministers and stuff. And we're trying to deal with climate change by bringing these really expensive technologies, because most people are looking at it as a cash cow. It's the most absurd thing ever. We're all sitting in the same bloody boat. If the boat sinks, no matter if you're sitting in first class or you're sitting in cattle class, we know what the end result's going to be, right? Same type of thing with AI. Consultants have to stop trying to charge a premium for something, and we need a philosophical change to say, how do we get everybody ready for what the next tidal wave is going to be? If we can do that in a pragmatic way, we stand a chance moving ahead. If we don't, no matter, even if you survive the next 5 years, what happens in the next election cycle? And they need to feel the pinch of this, knowing that now we have a product that shouldn't have any human interference in my belief, to make sure that it's impartial. That's where the programming comes into. They can say, if you have committed corruption whilst you're in power, you will now send the test of investigation, because everything will be centralized, it will be seen. And then it becomes interesting. But there's a caveat there. Then there's also problems that happen on the other side. The ending part for your audience is, we are entering to an unprecedented area. A lot of people take the content of AI and conceptualize it and make it very, very, very intellectual. The reality is, this touches on real people's lives. It's going to touch the media framing world in terms of how we look at content, how we absorb content, and how it's going to impact the next society. We've seen that with divisions in the UK. We saw that what happened with algorithms, people and people having violence. I've seen that amongst my own travels. We're going to see the impact on it on businesses. We'll see the impact on it in valuations. And also we'll see the impact on job losses. The only way to deal with this is a philosophical change in way that we look at business.
And we know that is very difficult to get, and that is a continuous work, because humans don't change. And actually, that's one thing as well. If you look at history, we didn't change since Homo sapiens for the last 10 years. 10,000
well, do you know
years.
what? I'm going to agree to disagree with you, and I'll tell you why, though. I'll perfect it. When we set up the Global Indian Network, everyone thought, what a wild, wacky, hippie idea that Rajan's got on the top of his head. Altruistic. How can we change the world one conversation at a time? And then it started working. When you had the issues that happened in South Africa, it would have happened in silo, because Julius Malema would have done what Julius Malema did, and the world would never have heard about it. But because we had a network, all of a sudden, those riots found itself a voice in Trinidad and Tobago, where we had the former head of state talking out publicly against it. Then we had members of the House of Lords speaking about it. Because what we did is that we provided the option of publicity on issues that most of the times were only living silos. What it meant is that we had more empathy as a community. When we started seeing the rises in trafficking that was happening in places like the US, we had Ambassador Naila Amin, whose work then changed the legislations in New York to create the Amin law, which stopped any child under 18 from getting married, even if it's religious purposes. What we can do is, if we create a better connected world, if our medias are more strengthened, if VCs back these type of ideas, we can create something that we've never done before in the history of people. And drum roll, please, is creating combined empathy. Because now we understand the content and we understand the context of the content, we can then start delivering change. The thing is, it's possible. It just means that the right voices, the right products out there are the ones that need the backing of financial mass. Things that collectively combine the human experience and, more importantly, provides exposure to some of the problems, because those are the things then become the future of tomorrow, because they create movements. You have a bigger audience pool, companies benefit, audiences benefit, we create a virtuous circle. What we've done at the Global Indian Network is the biggest coup in the history of people. Not only have we created a massive encyclopedia of the human experience, but we connected all echelons of society amongst a common idea, which means it's possible. You know, what you've done, Dinis, is a proving point of it. You've taken AI that everyone thought was a matrix or the Terminator, you condense it down into really simple ideas that people can hold on to, bite and chew. And what it does do, it allows us to have more awareness of what the next coming is going to be. It's possible. It just needs the fan and the flame of oxygen of publicity around it for it to work fully. That's my Jerry Springer moment.
No, I subscribe, and I'm glad that we are finishing on a positive level. So, as last question, and I know that we passed 1 hour, so, and definitely probably will be doing a lot of serious. So we discuss, of course, your organization, and there's the work you're doing in involving a lot of different people, a lot of different leaders, a lot of different, not just leaders, but as well, like you said, people that bring empathy. Because it's really important that the empathy comes, and like you said, is how we create this momentum, because it's about voices that listen to voices. Because the challenge right now is that we have I would say, a monocordic media, and as well players like us. It's increasing more difficult to get the voice, because although you have all these kind of growth hacking platforms, they're still dependent of quite a lot of costs that you have to do with the big players of Silicon Valley. So to finalize, so your vision for the Global Indian Network, and as well how people can engage, people listening to us from India, and I'm sure other places in the world, because I always like to have, like you said, the empathy. That's the idea. Even if you're one person in this podcast engaged with you, and I hope there's more than one, but there's always opportunities. And as well, people have, as well on that being very positive, there's more things that people can do that they cannot do, but it's about how able you're going to do it.
Absolutely. I think the one thing that the goal for the Global Indian Network has always been and maintained is to change the world one conversation at a time. Whether that's to do with business, we got our brand business portal there, or it's to do with health, talking about how you can be healthy, or with sexuality and identity, is de-integrating the ideas around identity. And that means, as an audience, if you want to see the world with nuance and not noise, we're the platform that you need to listen to, because there's no one else on this planet that has been around these countries, met the people, and there's no other platform in the world that carries these stories. And that's not me saying it, but you can see it on the platform as well. What change do I want to make? Because there's no point doing a business if it doesn't have a positive impact on the human experience for all. The change that I want the world to do is that we start having more nuanced conversations, deeper, not clickbait, but deeper conversations that eradicate stereotypes, but connect us all across the globe. We need that more than ever before, Dinis, because the reality is, tomorrow, when AI platform starts to continue moving, where we now have AI anchors, where we have even movies that are done, songs that are written from an AI point of view, the media and the content that we listen to will derive in the world in which we live tomorrow. That's why it's important right now that we have more human stories that are done with that agenda. If you look at our work, it is done with that agenda. We don't tell you how a person is, we tell you how the situation is and the context around it. So that means we're not a voice piece for any nation, but we're a very open source platform that does what human beings do best, which is have a conversation without fear or favor. That is an important part to that. What do I want in the future? Absolutely. I want more people to join us, guys, in this pursuit, this movement of minds. And what I wanted to do is go past my lifetime and your lifetime where other people carry on to the ethos of it and saying, here is a last bastion of human hope, where rather than living in silos around the world, now we got a two-way conversation where everyone can be involved in to reshape the future for all of us. Because we deserve that as the communities go. That's what I'm looking for. And for me personally, man, it's been a wild ride so far. You know, I get to see the world as it is rather than how I am. I'm pretty happy, right? You get to travel, get to see, and from everything from being taken hostage through to Cat 5 to your boat, it's such a wonderful experience. And I want more people out there to have those experiences in the good and the bad, because it is life-changing. And if they can't travel, listen to the damn podcast. It saves you from all the pain and the agony, right? But what this as a movement, there should be more people out there doing this.
Well, I appreciate this wonderful energy and the way of concluding this fantastic 1 hour. So we're going to be highlighting your platform, your work, and for people listening to us, please follow Rajan and engage with him, because that's really a fantastic and, as you see, passionate focus. And as well, there's a lot of things that you work in terms of leadership. So probably last thing is where people can find. I know we're going to put all the links, but coming from you directly.
Yeah, this is my Dragon's Den 60-second picture where you can find me. And no, it's not on any dating sites. I am happily married. Okay, so if you want to find out about the podcast, super simple. It's all on the Global Indian Network. It's www.globalindiannetwork.com. Go to podcasts, it's all there. And it's all free. I believe conversations that change the world by people, for people, should be free. There's no paywall. There's never any intention to put one there either. So that's the first place you can go. If you want to connect on social medias, you got me, Rajan Nazran on Instagram. You got Facebook, or you got the team at Global Indian Network on the Instagram handles. You can find us there. You can see all our videos, same thing on YouTube as well. And if you're a business that likes to change the world and be at one with communities and also get involved in the network that we have, you can reach out to me on nazranroth.com, which is our commercial arm that helps things do better. And we do a big vetting system. We believe, again, everything we do has to have a virtuous circle. We're probably a very different type of business setting up, but human values mean something. And therefore, it can't be just things that we say, it's things that we have to practice as well. And that's where all the details are. And even more so, you can just get hold of me through Dinis. Is the easiest way going forward.
Well, thank you so much, Rajan. It's been a really honor. And we're going to be, for people listening to us, we're going to be doing more things with Rajan. I think this is the beginning. I really love his vision and what he's doing, and especially the passion he puts into things. It's not easy. And it's very easy to, as well, becoming cynical or question everything, or get some kind of theory of conspiration that everyone is controlled by something. But in the end of the day, it's people like us that do the work, and people like you that are listening to us all over the world, wherever you are. As well, one thing we didn't discuss, Rajan, is that you have as well a network of African leaders. So we'll put all these links and the bio that is interesting and important here. So and probably we'll take that for a special Africa that I know that is very dear to you, and I need to do especially India. So Rajan, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for being here. And for people listening to us, please engage, study Rajan, go to his platform and learn and get amazing pearls of wisdom and things that can change your life.
God, you're silver-tongued devil, aren't you, Dinis? But thank you very much for having me on. Thank you very much for giving me the platform to speak to your incredible audience, and not in a self-congratulatory way, but well done to people like you, because in this whole perimeters of the human experience, it matters that we have real voices that have a huge impact on people. We live in a world where conversations of absurdity are creating real world atrocities. That's why voices like yours matter, because it means that we can put things into context and make a wider difference for the future generations to come. So thank you as well.
Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode. Please share your thoughts, questions, or a topic you want next in the comments section. My team and I read them all and will tailor our future videos around your feedback. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next drop. Until next time, stay healthy and informed.